everyone. I'm Holly Lawford-Smith and I'm here on behalf of the LGB Alliance Australia. And tonight I have the pleasure of talking with Jan, who is an Aussie mother of a trans child. So we're just going to talk a bit about her experiences in the last few years. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me today.
Hi.
Hi. So maybe we can just start with you telling us a bit about who you are to the extent you're comfortable. So sort of where are you based and like what's been happening in the last little while, and then we'll just see where we go from there.
Oh, I live in Newcastle in New South Wales. I'm married. I have two children. My daughter, who's 20, who identified as trans just before she turned 18. And I've also got a 15-year-old son and three older stepsons. So we run our own business and, just happy, what I would have thought normal family. And yes, my daughter had particularly poor mental health for a 3-year period,
Yeah.
sort of 15, 16, 17, and then what was really to us very out of the blue, that she declared she was really a boy. And from that point on, our lives were turned completely upside down.
So had she shown any signs of sort of gender dysphoria, non-conformity, dissatisfaction in her early childhood?
No, not at all. It was only in the few months prior to that announcement that I started to see little things. She'd had her hair cut short and her attitude was changing in those few months prior to announcing it. But for all through her childhood growing up, absolutely nothing at all. I mean, she'd been a, very intelligent, really beautiful, kind, loving, caring young girl into lots of activities. She played soccer, she did taekwondo, she did, drama, swimming, tennis, all the usual things kids do, trying different activities growing up.
Yeah.
And so, but she did get bullied quite a lot.
Yeah.
And, whether that has had some effect on her mental health, that's something I did discuss with doctors. In that 3-year period prior to her coming out as transgender, she had really poor mental health, anxiety, depression, an eventual diagnosis of bipolar. And in that period, I counted up 70 appointments in 3 years to do with mental health.
Wow.
So I was pretty much on a merry-go-round of mental health for 3 years before we even struck the transgender situation.
Good. So we'll definitely talk more about that, but just before we do, kind of interested in the earlier period, like, do you know if the bullying was kind of directly related to her sex? Like, was it about, do you have any sense of that, whether it was related to her appearance or her body or her...
I really don't know. It's really, no. There were some really nasty girls at her school who were very vicious. And I don't understand why that happened.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that only late last year, she got a diagnosis of autism spectrum and ADHD.
Right.
And from what I've read up, that teenage girls are very hard to diagnose with being on the autism spectrum.
Yep.
And so maybe there was that difficulty relating to her girlfriend peers.
Yep.
And that other girls sensed that difficulty, that she never quite fitted into peer groups.
Yeah.
So, there is that. And then what happens when those girls don't fit into the peer groups? They get bullied.
Yeah.
I mean, I was bullied at school, so I do know what it's like. And yes, if you didn't quite fit in, it was a horrible experience.
Yeah. Oh, poor her. I mean, yeah, that's absolutely awful. It's interesting that you say that because it's such a classic story. Like, before you had said anything, the thing to ask, right, would have been, and is your daughter autistic or is she a lesbian? Like, these are the things that we're learning are kind of in really high prevalence in the cohort of girls who are identifying as trans, right?
Well, she told me she was a lesbian at age 13.
Right.
So
So
two
she's
years
both.
before the mental health problems started, she told me that. I mean, I didn't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
I did suggest to her, maybe just be a bit quiet about it at school because she'd already had bullying and kids can be cruel.
Yeah.
And that was the only sort of suggestion I made, that just be careful of who you tell that to,
Yeah.
because people had already bullied her and I didn't want to see that continuing. But, that other than that, fine, I didn't have a problem with it. But
Yeah.
so, yes, she had definitely identified as a lesbian at quite a young age.
Wow. But that's yeah. So she is a lesbian and she's on the autism spectrum as well. And then, as you
Yes.
say, there were these complex mental health problems,
Yep.
which could be caused by the bullying, could be caused by internalized worries about coming out or how she's
Yes.
handling that.
Mm.
Could be caused by a whole range of things.
Yes. I mean, I've read so extensively on that topic, and that is the thread that runs through so many of these young girls, that
Yeah.
they have those similar situations.
Yeah. So what was your experience like? Did she, when she announced that she was in fact trans, what happened from there in terms of clinicians or appointments, or what happened after that moment?
It all happened very quickly. We had taken her to the GP, and she had been seeing another psychiatrist who at that point declared, well, he couldn't deal with that issue, and suggested she see a different psychiatrist who did deal with gender issues.
Yep.
So we went to the GP to get a referral to him, but he had it was 9-month waiting list to get in to see him.
Yep.
So in the meantime, she told her other psychiatrist she was suicidal and was going to kill herself. In retrospect, I don't think she was like that, but I think this is the script she learnt from. I found a browser history of all these transgender sites that she'd been accessing online.
Right.
And so I think this was part of the script that they learn. And so when she told that to the psychiatrist she was under, he told us we had to immediately take her to our local hospital, which we did. And so there was a hospital admission into the the children's psychiatric ward, which was the most traumatic event I've ever experienced. My husband had her admitted. It took all night long on the Thursday night. I stayed home with our son. By the time I got there in the morning to visit, there was already a male name above her bed. I said I was there to see my daughter. I was corrected and told no. I objected to this. I said this is madness. I was pretty much bullied and ridiculed by the staff. I went into shock.
Yeah.
I was in such a state of shock I could barely function. And that was on the Friday. Then come the Saturday, they wanted to clear the kids out of there for the weekend because they have a skeleton staff over the weekend. So they sent her home on day release, which was a disaster because she kept telling me she wanted to kill herself. So I took her back and said, well, I'm not taking her out on the Sunday. On the Monday, we had to go to a family meeting, but I actually couldn't get out of bed. I was in such a state of trauma that my husband and my stepson, who was in his 30s, went to the meeting. And the meeting was just horrific. They both, the staff said things to our daughter, oh, and I suppose when you were little, your mother dressed you like a girl. And the way the meeting was run, according to my husband and stepson, was just atrocious.
Just blaming them.
They were not interested in any of the 3-year history, any of the relevant issues that had gone on.
Yeah.
I managed to then go to attend a meeting on the Tuesday where they wanted to discharge her that day. They wanted to refer her to an endocrinologist. We said, no, we're not agreeing to a referral to an endocrinologist because we know that means putting her on hormones. We want to go back to our GP and the private psychiatrist who have been recommended to see. I said to the lady, I'm not having my 13-year-old son watch my daughter grow a beard, and I said, I don't agree with any of this. And she told me I needed to teach my son to be inclusive. The way we were treated was just, I don't have words for how terribly we were treated.
Yeah.
They discharged her that day. But my husband said, and then they said, oh, we have a transgender member of staff. Can we introduce her to that person? My husband said, oh, have you got anyone who transitioned and regretted it? Could she meet someone like that as
For
well?
balance.
And yeah, they didn't like him saying that. But I don't know whether the woman who was running all this was transgender. I suspect she was.
Yeah.
And then they discharged her that day. So virtually in the period of time they had her, there was no time for therapy, no time for investigation.
Yeah.
Just discharged her. We said, no, we're not having the referral to the endocrinologist, going back to her own GP. And the following day she went out and shaved her head and came home with the shaved head.
I'm just baffled by the fact that, I mean, even if they brought into the worldview that there's really like such a thing as, you know, everyone who identifies as trans is trans and it's a real innate phenomenon, it's just like being gay, even if they brought into all of that, you'd still think that they might be a bit more gentle with the parents in terms of what's happened and what they think is going on, and sort of understand that it could be a real shock, that it could take some time to get used to. So I'm amazed that you say they just kind of treated you all like bigots right off the bat. I mean, what a bizarre...
Well, I went into such terrible post-traumatic shock. I became suicidal the week after. I mean, that was...
It's a shocking...
I've never felt so low in my life.
Yeah.
And that was a result of what those people in that hospital did to us.
How they
that
treated
day.
you. Yeah.
It was shock to be treated like that.
Yeah.
I took me a long time to get over it.
Well, it also...
And from that point in time, because they affirmed our daughter and we wouldn't,
yeah,
she just became really awful to us.
Yeah.
Every day we were abused verbally in our house. I mean, I was told I was a pathetic parent, I was a bigot, I was a boring heterosexual, I was a white privileged bigot, I was this, she would stand with her face centimetres from mine, abusing me, yelling at me. And I mean, our son had become anorexic with the stress of her behaviour.
Yeah.
His weight dropped to 34 kilos. I mean, he would curl up in a little ball on the floor and sob and cry and say, Mum, tell her to stop, because she wouldn't stop ranting.
Yeah.
And this is what other parents I've come in contact with say. It's like, this isn't your child in that body. There's someone else who's put a script in their head.
Yeah.
And all the stuff that she was lashing us with, all this weird ranting about things, it was like someone had put a tape recorder and all this stuff was coming out.
Yeah.
That she'd learnt online what to say, what to manipulate, how to behave. And it became so out of control that we ended up having to move her out of our home.
Wow.
Because we couldn't go on.
No, I'm so sorry to hear. I mean, that just sounds absolutely awful. I mean, so much for you to all go through, awful for your son. Like, I mean, yeah, I know that's not much, but...
No, it was... I have now reached... I mean, from the moment she announced and I started researching,
yeah,
and for those first 6 months, there wasn't a lot out there, but I found places like Fourth Wave Now in the States, and through a parent group over there, I eventually got in touch with a parent group in Australia and started to make those connections.
Good.
And find other people who thought like me that this was madness. That
so what
this
year were you? What year were you kind of starting to look into this?
Well, late 2018,
Okay, yeah.
and so I guess it was really 2019 early that I started to look, and eventually later that year found Lisa Lippman's first study. I found that.
Yeah.
I found the very first article Abadal Shrier wrote, When Your Daughter Defies Biology. I started to find things online that supported how I felt, that this was something. I was born in the 60s, in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. There were no children saying they were going to kill themselves if they didn't go on hormones.
Yeah.
There were no trans children.
Yeah.
I felt, this is an invention of all this gender nonsense that has been pushed down people's throats.
Mm-hmm.
That it's come from somewhere, and it has come from indoctrination on the internet and now through schools and other places, that there is this gender identity. I mean, I just think it's madness, and it's caused so much damage.
Yeah.
Because I see what it has done, what it did to our daughter, and she ended up going to the endocrinologist against our will. She turned 18, she did it, second appointment they gave her testosterone.
Wow.
So they eventually, in the May of that following year, I went to see this endocrinologist with her, because why won't you come? Why won't you come and see, all this? So I went, and I told them how concerned I was about her mental health history, this long history, that we were going to see this other psychiatrist, but we had to wait 9 months to get in to see him. And this endocrinologist and a nurse and a social worker were in the room, and my sister came with me. She's a doctor. So my sister and myself and my daughter were there, and my sister explained all the concerns she had from a medical perspective, and we said all this stuff and how we had the appointment, but it wasn't for several more months, and we wanted to wait to see this specialist psychiatrist. And this endocrinologist said to me, "Don't you just want to see your daughter happy?" And I said, well, I think there's more to parenting than seeing your child happy. There are so many concerns I have about this. And they sat there and didn't tell me that they'd already given her a script for testosterone.
Right.
2 months prior.
So she'd already started taking it. And
But because she wasn't living with me at that time, I didn't know, but I had suspicions that there were changes happening. But they did not tell me. They let me sit there like a complete fool and didn't say anything, listened to all these concerns I had. And when I found out, it was the next month, I think I had my fears, but then I found out, and by then it was too late. She was already on it.
Yeah.
And she took it for 18 months, I think, and partway through last year, so she started in 2019 March, when she moved out of our house and started it. That year that she dropped out of school, she should have been doing year 12. She didn't go back to school. I encouraged her to try and go to uni and do New Step, so she could still matriculate. She did about 2 or 3 weeks and dropped out. She pretty much spent all of 2019 in bed in the student accommodation where she was living. I encouraged her I said, you need to have a mental health admission. You have spent nearly a year in bed, you need help. So under our medical fund, she was still covered. We got her into a private hospital with a mental health facility where she stayed for 6 weeks. In February, March of last year. Then when she came out of that, we were on a waiting list for dialectal behavioural therapy classes, because the gender psychiatrist she eventually got into the year before diagnosed her with complex PTSD from the bullying. So once she started these behavioural therapy weekly classes, we saw an immediate improvement. In the first week, she actually went back to her real name. She dropped the boy's name and went back to using her name. And we were seeing a lot more of her. I was feeling really, really positive. After a couple of sessions, then she told me she was stopping testosterone. Oh, I was just over the moon. Then in August last year, my husband's mother died quite unexpectedly. And at that point, our son hadn't spoken to his sister for over 18 months. He couldn't cope. He couldn't even lay eyes on her. It caused him just too much distress. but I said, you need to reconcile, you need to both be at the funeral, we need to sort this out. So we had all the family here for a get together the weekend before the funeral, all my stepsons and their partners, and our daughter came over, and eventually my son came where we were at the back and reconciled with his sister. I mean, it was a horrible thing to have to reconcile over, but it happened. I was so happy for that.
Yeah.
And you know, I took her out shopping to buy her clothes for the funeral because she had no clothes. I thought we'd actually got the closest in such a long time. But then the weeks after the funeral, I just got a really, really bad feeling. And I said, and my husband said the same thing to me on the same day. About a month later, I have a really, really bad feeling. She was really binding her breast tightly, and I rang up our health fund and I said, you know, our daughter is covered under our health fund. Is there any way she could do anything like having her breasts removed under our health cover?
Yeah.
And the health fund said, yes, she could do that.
Yeah. And without your permission or knowledge?
Without our knowledge, because she was 19 and she's covered under our fund, so she could access treatment without our permission.
Right.
And we found out they had issued a quote for breast removal to one of our local private hospitals the week before.
And this was when she was then still using her female name and dressing in...
Oh, the dressing didn't change, but she'd stopped testosterone.
So stopped testosterone and changed the name. Okay.
Mm.
So that's interesting. So what do you think about that? That was a sort of front, or that she had gone back and forwards?
I'm lost. I'm lost on all this. I do not understand it. I don't get that at all. I said to her, we don't agree with that. You're too young. I've read too many stories of regret that young women get into their 20s and have terrible regret. You can't replace your breasts. You know, I said, you may decide one day you want to have children. I didn't decide I wanted to have children until I was 35.
Yeah.
I mean, I was 37 when I had my daughter. I said, and I was adamant I wasn't having children. That was me. I had 3 stepsons who were very little when I met my husband. But the situation changed, and I changed my mind. I said, you might change your mind. I said, breastfeeding is one of the most amazing things that you can do. If you have your breast cut off, you'll never be able to do that.
Yep.
You know, don't do that. You're 19, you're so young, your brain's not developed. Don't do this. So we removed her from our health fund. We took her off our health fund.
Yep.
And the funny thing was, she went to this plastic surgeon and she gave him permission to talk to us. Mm-hmm. And we spoke to him, my husband and I did, and I told him her history, I told him our concerns. I said, were you cutting the breasts off young women 10 years ago?
What did he say?
And he sort of sheepishly replied, no, he wasn't.
Right.
And I said, well, aren't you at all curious as to what's going on around the world? Mm-hmm. That this huge uptick, people say up to 4,000% increase in teenage girls having trouble with their identity and claiming they're boys. And I said, doesn't that worry you, that you could be harming these young women? Mm. He was extremely sheepish. He, you know, didn't really say too much. He sort of muttered that, well, the people he'd done it on all came in with their parents who were supportive, and we were the first people who weren't supportive. And I ended up writing him a long letter and buying him a copy of Abigail Shrier's book, Irreversible Damage.
Good for you.
And I dropped them into his surgery, and I've never heard from him again. And then our daughter just decided that was it. She was cutting us off.
So what happened with was it that when she went to the plastic surgeon, she realised she'd been cut off the health fund, so she needed him to talk you into paying for it? Like, what was you don't know? Okay.
I don't know.
And you don't know if she has had the surgery now?
She hasn't, as far as I know.
Okay.
She wouldn't see us at Christmas time. I asked her because my father is 99 and it was going to be my dad's 100th Christmas and probably, his last Christmas. My mother's really unwell too. And I said, please come and have Christmas, see your grandparents. She refused. And then she told my stepson and, well, I tried to ring her and I could tell my number must have been blocked. So I rang from a different phone and got her mid-January, and she told me she wouldn't even refer to me as mum. I'm my name. I'm not mum, and I never want to see you again in my life. So right now, my own mother is very ill. We don't expect her to last much longer. And I've asked my stepson to pass this message on to her that if she does want to see her grandmother again, she probably should do it very soon because we really don't expect mum to last. But I've had no communication.
Wow.
I know, it's terrible. It's
like
terrible. I really thought she was turning the corner last year.
It did sound like it, yeah. I mean, that's quite confusing. What
I see what happened was the student accommodation where she lives. There's about 10 students in the house, and there were some international students. And she really palled up with this lovely French girl and was coming around to her house quite a lot, who was a totally normal girl. So she was coming around walking the dogs with this girl, had really made this friendship. But then when this girl had to return to France in July last year, it's like that friendship crumbled. And these are the incidents I've seen in her history, is that when a friendship crumbled, she just went to pieces. And I can see that was the start then of this suck back into the trans identity again. After that all went to pieces.
You can sort of see why. I mean, I guess if they get very invested in the friendships, or especially if they have a crush on the friend, or if there's something romantic feelings, and then you feel abandoned and you retreat online, right? And then you have these huge activist communities with these narratives. And I think what you said earlier about she seemed to have this script in her head. I mean, so many people are saying that about what they observe of their children spending time online and then just parroting this propaganda, right? Like
yes, absolutely. It's amazing. I mean, I have such a great network of people I wish I'd never had to meet, but we've had to meet, and we support each other so much going through this with our adolescent and young adult children. And that theme, it is so strong, this brainwashing. But what I will never come to terms with is that the brainwashing is cheered on by the medical profession. And that is what is so criminal, that those doctors are enabling this harm to happen.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's a sense in which we could have I know this is it's very personal for you and the other parents and families that have been affected, but of course there's some interesting discussion to be had about exactly what girls like your daughter are finding appealing in all of this, right? So I can sort of imagine there's things like a sense of control because you've been empowered to see yourself as victimized, and you can paint certain people as the enemy, and it does give you some sense of empowerment to be able to sort of say, like, these people are bigots and this is my community and they support me. So you feel you have some solidarity and some camaraderie, and so there are all sorts of rewards for the kids, I think. But like you say, the real perplexing part of it is that adults and the people in charge are buying into it and enabling it. That's
the very people who should be exercising caution, doing no harm. It's chilling. It's actually really chilling and terrifying that the extent of harm, the extent around the world of these gender clinics, of the reach it's truly shocking.
Yeah.
And I am so afraid for the future of all these young people, because there's going to be so much regret
Yeah.
and so much irreparable damage.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
you know, this this is a fad. This wasn't happening even 20 years ago.
No, for sure.
It wasn't. And the fact that people can't recognize that astounds me.
Mm.
It's, you know, I've lost all faith in the medical profession. I think the internet is such an evil place, so much of it, and the online grooming. I mean, our daughter first came in contact with two other girls who were trans at a drama group.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is what they say. They, you know, clusters happen. So that did happen. This cluster at the drama group.
Yeah.
I saw online grooming from another trans person telling her to snip her family, mother effers, get rid of the mother effers, snip, get rid of them, your family are awful. I've saw stuff like that messages being sent to her, encouraging the fracture of the family and to turn against your parents. And it's such a sad situation for so many families.
Yeah.
The grief that families go through when they are broken like this.
Yeah. Is your impression from dealing with various medical people or people in authority along the chain of this experience that they are mostly well motivated, but they just really believe the narrative that trans is kind of like sexual orientation and being this very, you know, innate type thing that people really know they are? Or do you see more bad intention or, I don't know, profiteering? Like, people seem to go either way on the, like, is this all just a kind of giant tragedy where everyone's doing what they think is right, but they're really wrong about what that is? Or is there some more seedy, underhanded, capitalist, like, I don't know what, just gross motivations going on behind the scenes? Do you have a sense of that from the people you've encountered?
I think some doctors have a real narcissistic power personality.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that first endocrinologist, quite a young woman, I will never ever get over that meeting and thinking, you want to harm my daughter with these cross-sex hormones. You can't. How can you not, as a medical person, see how seriously mentally ill she is? And that, I think there are some who are just so enthralled with it. I think there are doctors who are fearful.
Yeah.
Fearful to speak up and speak out because they will be referred before medical boards if they say anything. I mean, I went to a conference organised by one member of parliament who's tried to do a bit of speaking up about this last February in Sydney, and two of the medical people who spoke, a paediatrician and a psychologist, and they had both been mass reported to their respective professional bodies by trans activists because they're speaking out. And you know, this is what happens to the medical professionals who try and speak out. This mass reporting of them because they're trying to raise awareness. So I definitely think there's a fear in doctors as well. I guess that, yes, and I mean that woman in charge of the clinic in Melbourne, I mean, honestly, I don't understand how anyone can think this is good for children. For goodness sake, every child, you know, so many children struggle through puberty. It's a difficult time, but it's the passage to adulthood. I mean, you know, girls change, we all change, girls and boys, to not even allow children to experience the proper, you know, trajectory of their puberty and to reach adulthood your brain's not developed till you're 25. People experiment. There are people who think, you know, maybe they were gay and realise they weren't, but they, you know, you have that discovery period. But doing this and putting people in this pathway, that once they're in it, it's very, very hard to get off it. But also that the harms that are occurring while they're on it can't be undone.
Yeah.
And that, it just blows my mind that people think this is a decision that anyone under 25 can make.
Yeah. I know, I mean, I completely agree. I'm really at a loss to, I think I'm still really trying to grapple with what the big explanation is, like why so many people have bought into it and why the whole medical establishment seems to be on board, and, you know, just where exactly that's...
The regulatory capture and the funding coming to these organisations to say they're on board with this stuff. Yeah. I mean, there was our local MP put on his Facebook page promoting some transgender adult who'd been elected into some office in the USA, in America, not even relevant to our country, in the American elections last year. Oh, kids, look at this fabulous role model for transgender children on his Facebook page. And I have met with that man and told him our story and told him our concerns. And I wrote to him and I said, you know, the Kira Bell case, I said, how young are you promoting this to children? What age do you think children should get on the transgender pathway? Like, you've ignored everything I've tried to tell you about the harms and the damage being done. Why are you promoting this to children? And he wrote back one line, I can't agree with anything you said, or something. You know, I just...
Yeah, it's typical from politicians though, isn't it? You can't discuss anything on this topic if they're on the left. Like, we had the same thing in Victoria, trying to contact people from Labour or the Greens about sex self-ID legislation, about the conversion therapy bill recently. I mean, they just don't want to hear anything that is bound up with gender identity stuff. They just have their narrative and they're sticking to it.
I mean, I wrote after the debacle that happened with my daughter's hospital admission and the terrible way we were treated, I complained to the hospital. I was rebuffed. I wrote to the Prime Minister, I wrote to the Premier, I wrote to the AMA, I wrote to the Federal Health Minister, I wrote to the State Health Minister, I wrote to all these people. I have a swag of letters, and the responses I got were just so patronising and pathetic. Yeah. Fob off, you're the one who needs help, hope you're getting counselling, you need help, and support the AMA, support your transgender child, here's websites for parents to support their transgender child. It was beyond belief, and I ended up making a complaint to the Healthcare Complaints Commission about what happened with the hospital referring her immediately for hormones. The complaint was dismissed. No, they didn't do anything wrong. So then, was the following year after she had been admitted, I managed to access the discharge summary of that hospital visit, and the discharge summary was written up saying that we agreed to the referral to the endocrinologist. And because she was 17, they needed our permission. We didn't agree to that. So I complained to the Healthcare Complaints Commission that her discharge summary had been falsified because they wrote that we agreed to the referral and we did not agree to the referral. So that complaint was also dismissed. So I appealed it, and I said, you haven't actually addressed what I complained about. I am complaining because they falsified the record and said we agreed. They wrote back and said, no, there was nothing wrong. We have found there was an apparent agreement.
What kind of fudge claim is that?
So my husband rang the case officer whose name was on it and said, what on earth do you mean by an apparent agreement? He said there either was an agreement or there wasn't agreement, and we've explicitly told you we did not agree to that referral. So how can you say there's an apparent agreement? What does that really mean? case officer said to my husband, "This case is closed," and hung the phone up in his ear.
Wow. I mean, that's actually, I mean, that would be legally actionable if you had the energy, right?
I know, and I was on the verge of a breakdown. I mean, I
Fair
spent
enough.
so much of that year in tears
Yeah.
that you get to the point. I mean, you heard all the people I said I wrote to. I
Yeah.
mean, I run a business. I have a teenage son.
Yeah.
I have elderly sick parents. You know, you have all these other competing demands, and I devoted so much time. And
Yeah.
in the end, you just had no energy left. You're just so drained. You hate the situation you're in. You wish you never heard of any of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
It's
I totally understand.
so draining. It really is, and I don't know. And I guess one day there'll be a class action
I hope so.
by all these damaged young people,
Yeah, I hope so.
because I don't see that anything. No, all the parents I know have done what I've done, written all letters, the same letters to the same health ministers, the same parliamentary members, or their own parliamentary local members. Everyone's I know has been treated the same as we have,
Yeah.
fobbed off.
Well, if they have this narrative, again, I just keep running this parallel to being gay. They just really think it's the same. And so they do think all the parents and families that deny it are just being bigots. And they don't countenance the possibility that there really could be something else going on. So it's like, until we can break that narrative, I don't think we're going to get past the impasse.
No,
Um,
no, I don't see. I feel, what else can I do? I mean,
yeah,
I seriously believe our daughter probably will realise one day that
yeah,
she made a mistake, but then, you know, she's going to have to live with the consequences of what she's done,
yeah,
and you just have to say to yourself, you've got to get on with your life and find some happiness for yourself and my husband and my son who's still at school,
yeah,
and because, you know, this is seriously a brainwashing cult that sucks these young girls in.
yeah,
And, you know, I know they weren't around 20 years ago. I look at all those sort of fads and cults that attract adolescents, the
yeah.
hippies, the punks, the goths, the rockers, the emos. Where are all the adult hippies, punks, goths, emos walking around these days?
No, they're not. This is
But
the
they went
fad.
through their fad, they went through their phase,
Yeah,
and you know, I know you're not allowed to say that, how terrible you say that, but do I really believe that this 4,000% increase in girls, there were no transgender girls 20 years ago? I don't believe it's insulting to the genuine transgender people.
yeah,
I believe, and a lot of the transgender adults who are reasonable say the same thing.
they do.
They can see the harm being done to
Yeah.
the young people.
Yeah. No, a lot of the transsexual people are on our side and speaking out against this.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
because they can see that these people have become, you know, obsessed with this movement, and they
Yeah.
will grow up one day.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Last question I wanted to ask you before we go. How's your son doing now? So you mentioned earlier the separation with
Oh,
the.
you're never going to guess what with my son. He went back to school. He said, "Mum, you're never going to believe it." He said, "There's a girl in my class, and we have to call her him."
No. So he's feeling a bit traumatized by trans
Oh,
identification.
and he's usually, you know, and he's mentioned it every week since school's been back, that this happened with, oh, you know, they've changed her name on the roll, and what are pronouns, Mum? He said, "What are pronouns?" I mean, I laugh with him. I laugh about it. I said, you don't have to validate somebody's made up identity. I said, you don't have to go along with something. You don't have to pretend what you see is wrong.
Yeah.
I said, just try and stay away from that person and avoid the situation. I said, but if you're put on the spot, you do what you think is right, because he's been through the trauma of his sister,
Yeah.
and he can see the same path this poor girl in his class is obviously heading down,
Yeah.
and it has traumatised him.
Yeah.
But other than that, you know, we had a nice holiday away, our family, in January. We had a good time. He even met Chris Hemsworth on holidays, so he was very
great.
excited. But yeah, no, he's, you know, he got over the anorexia. He's put on heaps of weight. He's
Good.
refereeing. He's going to the gym. He's, you know, he's doing well at school. So,
Good.
you know, we're doing our best.
Yeah, good. I really hope you can tell the same story in 5 years' time about your daughter.
Yes, yep, yep. I mean, you know, all parents like me, we cling to the hope that our children don't do too much harm to themselves.
Yeah.
And, you know, hold on to sanity.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know
You're
these are
welcome.
probably hard things to relive and retell, but I really appreciate you.
It is. You forget some of the trauma, thank goodness.
Yep.
Thank you, Holly.
Thank you.